Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending the Environmental Justice Virtual Webinar Series, Accessing Funding for Communities. To enable closed captioning, please click the CC icon and select Show Subtitle. If you're having issues with the size of the closed captioning text, you may increase it by clicking the drop-down to the right of the CC icon on the Zoom control panel, which is typically at the bottom of your Zoom window. Next, you would select Subtitle Settings. Along the top pop-out, you'll see the closed captioning font size, and you can adjust the scroll bar to select Normal, Medium, Large. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's webinar on accessing funding for communities. My name is Charlotte Clark, and I'm the president of the Environmental Justice Alumni Association, and I'm an environmental consultant. As a member of the planning team for tonight's workshop, I'm here to give you a few quick Zoom tips before we get started with tonight's agenda. When it comes to how you view tonight's program, you have a few different options in Zoom. You can find these by hovering over your mouse pointer in the upper right-hand corner of the Zoom window. If you are currently in full screen mode, you may find your best viewing option is found by choosing the side-by-side option, which will allow you to see the speaker and the slides at the same time. If you are having technical issues or have additional questions about using Zoom, you can drop a message in the Q&A box. If you cannot access the chat box, please use the raise your hand function. You will find this by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. The purpose of tonight's webinar, I'm sorry, I need to also express a disclaimer. The views expressed by our non-federal participants and are their own and not necessarily those of the EPA or the federal government. The purpose of tonight's webinar is to basically join communities and community programs with the funding that's available. This is one of the EPA's 12 webinar series. We hope to share information with you about equipping you with information. We're going to use a collaborative, interactive approach in sharing the information with you. And I'm getting a message that my camera is not on, but it says that my video should be on. I'm sorry that my video isn't showing up, but it shows on my screen that the video is on. So I apologize that you can't see me.
We can see you.
Oh, okay. We're going to be hearing information from multiple agencies. You're going to learn what resources are available and how to access them. We're also going to cover what does the federal government look like when awarding grants? What are some resources and how do you register for grants? And we're also going to learn about other funding sources and supplemental documents. Our workshop agenda for tonight is we're going to cover a community case study that's going to be led by Omar Mohammed. We're going to cover grant application tips. We're going to learn about resources from academic institutions. We're going to have a panel of lightning talks where we have 3 dynamic speakers that are going to share with you about their programs and how you can access funding. And we're going to hear a talk from a grassroots initiative operative. We're also going to have a break from 7 to 7:05. You will have access to a lot of information tonight. I think we've got like 9 dynamic speakers that are prepared to share a wealth of information with you. So in case you can't write it all down, please refer to the resource guide, which will accompany the presentation. And I also wanted to let you know that the full bios of each of the presenters will be found on the website. It is now my pleasure to introduce Omar Mohammed, who will share a case study on how his organization has accessed funds and resources for their community. Omar Mohammed is from Augusta, Georgia, where he earned his biology degree from Augusta State University. He currently works for the Department of Natural Resources as a fisheries biologist. He has worked as a community advocate and activist since 2007 and as a volunteer with the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities. He is also a graduate from the EPA's Environmental Justice Academy, and he's going to be speaking with us tonight about the successes that he's had on the ground accessing funds for his organization. So Omar, I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate the introduction. Like Charlotte mentioned, my name is Omar Muhammad. I'm the Executive Director for the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities in the city of North Charleston, South Carolina. If the next slide can be shown. Thank you. I'm here today to introduce our organization and how we have went about securing funding, different types of funding to continue and sustain the work that we do as a nonprofit organization. Next slide, please. So just like many communities, particularly African-American communities, Black and Brown communities, disproportionate impact environmental justice communities, there are a myriad of different types of challenges in our communities, everything from food insecurity, low economic development, toxic exposure, infrastructure that doesn't support a quality of life, and then also the quality of housing stock in our communities are all challenging issues. And they really are challenging because not only the systemic and institutional realities that contribute to many of those challenges, but the necessary funding that is necessary, that is required to address many of these issues and concerns. Next slide, please. So the first thing we wanted to do as an organization, before we even began looking at what funding was out there to address kind of key issues in our communities, we had to understand, even within the community context, as well as our organization, how did we define community development and our understanding of what community development meant. So we had to define that by ourselves, so that when we go after funding and when we are looking for resources to address these issues, we had a definition in mind and an end goal in mind on how we want to use the funding and the results we want to see from the funding. So how we define community development as an organization is community development encompasses everything involving neighborhood beautification, affordable housing, economic development, and revitalization of low-wealth communities in the neighborhoods that make these communities up. So in defining this also, we had to look at the four kind of considerations or the four elements that make up this definition, right? Or to help to be guiding posts for our decisions of what type of funding we will go after, what outcomes we were looking for. So we need to understand the needs and the desires of our neighborhoods and communities. So that meant centering the residents in all the work that we do. And our work is being informed by those residents on a daily basis. That the efforts that we engage, the initiatives, the programs that we engage are community-led. That is important to the work that we do. And that the work focuses on self-help processes, that at the end of the process, at the end of the initiative, the program, our efforts, that we want to empower the residents at the end of the day. And then there needs to be a collective vision and shared goal, not only among the organizations that are working on these issues and concerns, but among the people that we are advocating for, that we work alongside, that we are helping and assisting to address their issues and concerns. Our vision and shared goals must also align collectively with their vision and shared goals. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we really found helpful is having the necessary skill sets within our organization. If we did not have the skill sets within our organization, then how could we collaborate with other organizations or even with a grant writer to be able to apply for many of these fundings that are available. So some of the kind of skill sets that we were looking for is the ability to be an excellent storyteller, right? Grant writing is really being able to tell your story effectively. Writing skills, excellent writing skills, the ability to do research, and the ability to understand the needs of both the organization that is seeking the funder and how the funding and how that meets the requirements of a particular funder. Next slide, please. So looking at how monies make it into communities, we had to really, for ourselves, understand the relationships of federal government, state, and local government fiscal roles and relationships. So there are several categories that funding, particularly grant funding, fall into. And this is more focused on the federal government here. So one category of funding is actually category fund grants, which this is a award to local governments to achieve a particular federal government priority area. An example of that is the Tiger grants. A second one is block grants, and this is a set of funding to achieve a set policy goal by the federal government. An example of that is CBDG dollars. And then there's grants where specific organizations or federal agencies have monies that they give out for a specific end goal. For EPA, that would be their EJ small grant as an example. Next slide, please. So for us, the various funds, forms of funding that we have been able to secure and bring into our organizations, again, through collaborations, partnerships, networks, looking at foundations, seeing what type of grants they have that can we could apply for and receive from their organizations. Participating in national initiatives that are looking at expanding availability of funds and really building the capacity of organizations to receive those funds, even from the federal government. And the Justice 40 Accelerator is one of those initiatives. And then organizations that have a global impact in communities like the Climate Reality Project. But also just not looking at those traditional organizations that provide funding, but looking at other institutions that provide funding. Your community development financial institutions, individuals, tax credits, and also looking at the possibility of sharing resources across networks, right? Sub-granting, sub-recipients through partnerships and networks to receive funding. And then also emerging approaches, right, to some of the challenges that we face in our community. Social impact bonds. Atlanta has a social impact bond when you look at the green infrastructure bonds to be able to build green infrastructure in their communities. And then community investment funds is something that we are investigating as well as a source of revenue to address many of these concerns. Next slide, please. There are different stages that we must understand when we're looking at funding. There's three major stages involved in funding when you have the pre-award. And this begins with a solicitation for proposals. So being able to read those proposals, understanding what the funder is looking for so that you can develop your proposal in response to that RFP or that funding request. And then there's an award phase where there's the determination of an award which is made, and you are announcement is made about what you are receiving. And then the post-award. This is really the one that I say where most of the work is being done after you receive the award is where most of the work occurs. This is where you do your reports, you are actually doing the work, so you're collecting the data, you're collecting the information, and you're reporting and updating your funder on a consistent basis on the progress of the program. Next slide, please. This is just a graphic that explains how the funds make it into communities or how the funds are received in communities. Again, federal government to the state government to your local and county governments, which goes into the community for infrastructure needs, family needs, rural areas, urban areas. And then also in non-governmental organizations, foundations, collaborations, and networks also have access to federal funding, state funding, and local funding, which they then also re-grant out and pass through, or they do the work themselves to address those needs in communities, both in urban, rural settings, infrastructure needs, as well as family needs. And that's the end of my presentation. And Charlotte will continue with the next phase of introducing our next slate of speakers. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Omar, for that presentation. And the next set of panelists will be Jay Blackwell, Rosie Manuel, and Dr. Dana Williamson. Dr. Williamson is a behavioral social scientist, and she earned both her doctorate degree and her master's degree from the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. She has over 15 years of experience with community engaged research, outreach, and development. She is the lead evaluator of the US EPA's, she's the lead evaluator of the EPA's Region for Environmental Justice Training Academy, and she focuses on capacity building, communication, and she has a heart for making sure that communities understand the health disparities that they're experiencing and that they get the tools that they need to address them. Jay Blackwell is the Director of Programs at Umoja Behavioral Health PC in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He uses his extensive background in public health and community development activities to assist his clients in improving healthcare access and treatment services. He specializes with at-risk populations. He is considered an expert trainer and facilitator in organizational infrastructure and resource development strategies and techniques. Rosie Manuel, she's also with the EPA. She serves as a public health analysis. I'm sorry, she's not with the EPA, my apologies. She serves as a public health analysis with the Health Resources and Services Administration in Atlanta. She's the state lead for Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. She has over 27 years of federal experience providing support to the HISRA program. And without further ado, I believe Mr. Blackwell is the first panelist of the three.
Well, good evening, and thank you everyone for joining us. This is a wonderful opportunity. There are so many, it's just like so much great information to be shared. What I'd like to bring to you today is just some successful grant tips. If you go to the next slide. My background is working in community. I am one of the panelists you were warned about who is not a federal employee. So I'll try to make sure that I'll be invited back for another time. When it comes to grant writing, especially if you are a nonprofit entity, I'd like to share some non-research grant writing tips with you. One of the first things I really want to share is this thing's about collaboration. You can see from the slide that I just have a few minutes to just talk about how collaborative outcomes are important in grant applications. I also want to share an approach that grant writers might want to consider: vision, design, and capacity. You see, every last grant you will ever write will have a vision component. It will talk about change. It will have a design component, which are based on your verbs. What are you trying to do? And then it will also have a capacity component. This is where you as a grant writer must illustrate how your agency is the best agency to receive those funds. Do you have the capacity, the skill, and the ability to follow up? That's part of what I want to share. Also, in these few minutes, really just want to clarify what is this VDC approach as a framework, how it assists writers, how collaborative outcomes is a strength-based approach to grant writing applications. I want to address intersectionality and then talk about your technical CACA. And we all know what CACA is about. Could we go to the next slide, please? When it comes to collaborative outcomes, think about equity. In an equity approach, when you work with those that are most impacted, everyone else up the line gets a chance to benefit. Intentional grant writing, when you are really sending or sharing an excellent idea, you are able to combine the elements of your community. You're able to maximize funding. You're able to show how this approach is one that involves a network of people. Whenever possible, you want to show that this is a new idea, you're clever. It can be based in a number of settings, from schools to businesses to homes. And of course, it is always cognizant of our environment. When you're able to show, demonstrate, combine these elements into a proposal or into your grant application, you're already looking towards success. And I'd like to share some additional with the next slide, start to talk about what that will look like. Vision, design, and capacity. Now, this is an approach that grant writers need to always keep in mind. Vision. Are you communicating a clear vision for change? You will find as you continue to focus on grants, almost every funder wants to talk about what's changing. Very few grant applications will say we want to pay you for keeping things exactly the way that they are. So change. What's changing? Who's changing? How is it changing? How are you as a writer communicating change? The D part, the design. This is about activities that are measurable and coordinated throughout the length of the grant. This is often found in many of your work plans and timelines. This is how you want to be careful of your verbs in your design elements. And then the capacity elements are about success. Funders do want to be aligned with successful organizations, successful ideas, and successful implementation ways that won't get a funder into trouble. So the grant writer's job is to really convey how the agency is demonstrating safety. Intentional change over time will be reflected in the logic models. We're going to have more information shared with us about logic models later. Every application, as a writer, you must keep in mind you have the writer, the reviewer, and the funder to structure your proposal around. Your technical CACA, this is an acronym, which I'll be getting to shortly, and we'll be able to stress priorities over tasks, and also mention success. Let's go to the next slide, please. Vision elements. Here are some pieces. When you download this presentation, you'll be able to see them more succinctly. Every application has a vision element to it. The next slide, please. We have design elements in grants and proposal. One more time. The next slide is capacity. And again, we'll be focusing on success. But I would like to really show you this slide. Almost every last grant, whether it is a federal application, a foundation grant, whether you're trying to speak to folks that you don't know about in the community or to other researchers, these are the 9 parts that we really kind of have to get through. These parts, the first part, the letter of intent, abstract, program narrative, mission statement are all vision elements. Your organizational summary, your program description, which includes like your timeline and your work plan. And then part of evaluation is a design element. But when it comes to analyzing your information from your evaluation, when it comes to demonstrating your capacity as budgets, fiscal responses, and the attachments that you choose, clearly this shows agency competency. And all of these sections, in one way or another, are part of every last grant application or association that you're going to deal with. When you're able to really look at how to approach an application, is this a vision question, a design question, or a capacity question? Grant writers have been able to turn around a higher percentage of their grants. Could we go to the next slide, please? I wanted to share that you can stress intentional change over time to really show how a funder's money is being stretched into the future. I wanted to reiterate the writer, the grant reviewer, and the funder have an intimate relationship in every grant application, and success. Let's go on to the next one so I can make sure to have some time for my guests. I'm sorry, for my co-panelists. So this technical CACA, these are about your words. CACA is an acronym. It stands for clear, accurate, correct, comprehensive, concise, and accessible. In grant applications, all of these approaches are necessary. Is your writing clear? Are you able to use factual data? The grammar needs to be correct because grant reviewers and funders don't like reports that are not grammatically correct or haven't added up correctly. Comprehensive and concise and accessible. So this is what we mean by technical caca. These are your words. How do you use your words? The next slide, please. When it comes to our logic model, we want to stress priorities over tasks. In many logic models, you have these categories, and they're actually great because resources tell the writer what we have. Activities, we scan for what we're going to do. Outputs mean things that we can count: the number of people, the number of classes, the number of reports, the number of meetings. These are all measurable. Outputs. Outcomes are about benefits. You can have a benefit to a person, a family, a community, a building, the environment. You can have all kinds of benefits, and these are outcomes. And most times funders want you to align your ideas with benefits. Impacts occur over time. So when we talk about intentional change over time, we want to be intentional in our activities. We want to talk about change related to benefits. And over time is that vision that we share about our impacts. Intentional change over time is associated with a logic model, which is part of this vision, design, capacity approach. We go to the next slide, please. Last and foremost, please, as a grant writer, be certain of your success. Give your grant reviewer and the funder an idea of where you're going. Talk about, describe what success means for you and how your ideas will help not only the community, but they'll also help the environment, and they'll also elevate the funder so that they can all be associated with success. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. It has been wonderful. Dr. Jacoby, you've got some great young lions on your team. Mr. Jan Michael is one of them, Jan Michael Archer. And I would like to begin to pass this on over to my co-presenter, Ms. Rosie Mangual of the Feds. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jay. Good evening, everybody. And today I'm going to be talking also about successful grant application tips. And by the end of this short session, you're going to understand what are the federal grant reviewers looking for, and what are their expectations, and know what you need to do to submit a successful application, how to make the most of the human capital that when you're writing application. And last but not least, how to register to complete an application and avoid the common pitfalls. Next slide, please. In summary, what are the feds looking for? They're looking for a good proposal. They're looking for clarity and competence, realistic goals, and attention to detail. What do I mean by that? They expect a solid proposal that has followed the application guidelines, and you clearly communicate your goals and objectives using the SMART process that you see at the bottom right of the screen. Goals need to be realistic, measurable, attainable within the time frame of that grant period. Last but not least, you need to pay attention to detail. If you want to succeed in this, in your application, and you need to follow the 5 R's. and you need to do the research, you need to recruit a team. And we're going to talk about what does that mean. Go back to the prior slide. Thank you. You need to respond to that guidance, and you need to make sure that when you respond to that guidance, you do it very intentionally, very methodically, because that way you are going to make it easier for that reviewer to look at your grant. You have to remember the grant reviewer is not only going to be reviewing your application, he's going to review quite a few more applications. And his time is precious. You have to remember that he's an expert in the field. So he already has in his mind a set of what your proposal should look like. And you have to review the application very well. And on average, it will take you 40 hours or more to complete an application. And you need to pay attention to detail while you're doing that, and revise it as needed. Next slide, please. I'm just gonna go through these very quickly and highlight some of the areas that you have here. You do the research. When you read that funding opportunity, you're not going to read it. You're going to study it. You're going to dissect it. That is going to be your Bible, so to speak, in order to submit a successful application. I suggest that when you do your research, that if you are going to able to help you, go ahead and find out any organizations that have applied for that grant in the past. Try to go ahead and talk to them. Also, I can speak for HERS, and I know the EPA, most of the federal agencies, that they provide the opportunity that if you have interest in applying, you can attend a technical assistance call. If it's offered, go ahead and do it. Also, in that funding opportunity, you will find out that usually there are two main contacts. There's a contact that deals with the programmatic areas of that grant, and also the one for administrative. If you have any questions, feel free to call that person that deals, that contact for the program aspects of it. But keep in mind, they are there to provide clarity to any doubts that you may have. They're not there to help you write the grant, but they are very helpful, and they will steer you into the right direction and some resources if you need it. Make sure that you understand the program. Go into it thinking, how can I make my organization fit in this proposal for this grant, because I need the money. You need to go into knowing and understanding and asking the questions. Am I ready? Is my organization meets the requirement? Am I ready to do this? Do I have the necessary sources to go about doing that? And then when it comes to recruiting the team, you need to take in consideration, like our first speaker said, you need to take in consideration, what is your capacity? What do you have? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And for that, you need to go ahead and get in your organization the best set of people that you have, the experts that you have, to help you with that grant. Look for people or staff that know your organization in and out. Not only, but sometimes we get people in a team to write the application, And you need to ensure that that person can give you an honest feedback and review when you have completed that application and you're looking over it. Also consider adding outside of your organization some stakeholders, some partners, and try to bring him, if the proposal, if the funding opportunity allows it, bring them in so they can help you to write the application, so they can bring clarity to the process. And be sure that if they are going to be part of that application, that you get the appropriate memorandums of understanding so that everything is when it comes to that aspect. The next one is responding to the guidance. This is very important. You and your team both need to be two things, and this was mentioned before as well. You need to be a good writer and you need to be a storyteller. Like Jay said, you need to make sure that when that reviewer picks up that application, he has a clear sense of what you're going to do. You have to let him know how good you are at it. And there is ways you still can tell your story, even though you have to be very much aware that every piece of paper is some real estate, and that you have to treat those pages that you have as a limit. You have to use it to the best of your abilities to tell your story, but tell it in a way that you're able to engage and you're able to inspire that reviewer, that he could say, wow, this is going to be a good project. I like the way that they're thinking. I like that they're innovative. So think about being a good writer and being a storyteller. Also is very critical. Address the sustainability. They want to know not only that you will be doing a good job during the period that you have this grant, this funding, but they want to see how are you going to continue that project? How are you going to continue and strive for the impact that you can have in your community? So make sure that you do that very intentionally, because applications, the funding opportunities, you're going to be graded in the different sections, and your sections are going to be weighted. You're going to have, certain points, 30% will go for this, 20% for that. So make sure that you have the eye in the prize in every of those sections. When you complete them, those 9 sections, sure that you are addressing everything that you have to address, that you don't miss any of that. When it comes to reviewing the application, like it says there, you have to be a good writer, but also I would suggest that not only you are able to respond to all of that in the application, but that you engage somebody that is outside of the organization or somebody that has not been involved in the application process and the writing, so that you good feedback, because that will let you know if it's clearly stated, if they can understand it, if they feel that it's worthwhile. So consider all of those, and also revise your application as needed. Next slide. When it comes to allocating your resources, on the left side of the screen, you see what those are. But one thing that the reviewers look very much, and it can raise red flag is if you dedicate a lot of your budget to personnel. So try to prioritize and see how you're gonna use that staff. Match the skills with the goals and objectives that you have. Consider the time and effort you would have. Sometimes you may be able to use only a half FTE instead of one. So consider and match the skills to the task. And also consider who in the organization or what sections in your organization have the bandwidth to do this. Dedicate people to this process and keep them, don't shift them from one section to another. Next slide. These are the three systems that you have to go into. I have highlighted here what different steps. The only one that I really would like to bring to your attention is DUNS. DUNS is the system that the federal government just no longer uses. And DUNS, it is what it helps to us to identify your organization and allow income funds. Now that is going to be done under SAM.gov and not DUNS. And what I really want to let you know that you can go into SAMS and you will be able to understand that process, but I have a quick tip for you. It is better that you go ahead and you go into the federal system request, FDS.gov, because when you go there, it shows the process a little bit clearer. Next slide. These are some of the common mistakes that you may do, and I want to call attention to the expiration of the SAM registration, because that drives a lot of things. And also, when you are going to be appointing the organization representatives, you need to take care of that. Next slide. Start preparing early. If you don't have intention of applying right now, start the process now and follow instructions carefully. Be brief, concise, and clear, and very much so show evidence of your fiscal stability and your sound financial judgment. Pay attention to the details in the submission. And of all these, I would like to, number 9, emphasize that. And go ahead and be sure that you print that application, actually you read it, so that you're able to proofread it. Don't do it from a screen, because you're doing a disservice to yourself. Next slide. Here are the resources that some resources that are giving you on the federal side. On the other side, you would have resources that is coming from foundation for state government, local government entities that will help you in the development of your grant, in the training of your. It addresses a lot of areas that you will to take to get additional funding. Next slide. Here's my contact information. If you have any additional questions, just feel free to go ahead and send an email to me. I'll let you know that if you have any questions related to the sections that we will not be able to cover, when you post your question in the QA section, please provide your name and your email, because get back to you within 3 working days. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dana Williamson, who will go ahead and speak about the logic model development and the CPS model. The floor is Dr. Williamson.
Thank you so much, Rosie, and good afternoon and evening, everyone. I have the pleasure of walking you through briefly an overview of the importance of logic models, as well as an introduction to the collaborative problem-solving model, which I'll reference as CPS periodically. These are both models that can assist with your grant application, as well as your program implementation. Next slide, please. So just briefly, in this first part, I will talk through logic model development. So what is a logic model? Why are they useful? And how can a logic model help your program organization? Next slide. So I want you to think about a logic model as a systematic and visual way to present the perceived relationships among the resources you have. How you operate as a program, the activities you plan to do, and the changes or results you hope to achieve. It's really a graphical representation of your program or the efforts that include your resources, activities, and your expected outcomes. And so it also includes some context of the environment you're trying to implement in your program or your effort. And so why are logic models useful? Well, because they're visual, think of this as a tool that can be used to graphically represent your program's efforts. It draws attention to the areas of strength or opportunities for growth, and it's iterative, so it's adjustable and it shifts and changes as your program changes as well. In this regard, it can be one of the most important tools that are used to assist your program on the development side, as well as help others understand your program's intentions, how you will achieve your desired goals, and identify the potential outcomes and long-term impact of your work. Next slide. So another way to think of a logic model is to imagine you're looking at an X-ray of your program or your project or your organization. And this skeleton is useful for bringing to light the invisible bone structure or the core elements that are holding everything together. It really helps to make the obvious connections. If we do A, then B should happen. Or before we can do this, we have to have this in place first. And so when you're applying for money or accepting money, the funder wants to know how their investment is contributing to either your everyday work or your greater cause. So having a logic model can help you visualize for others as well as yourself the connections between your efforts and help you decide how you can measure your impact. So now you may ask yourself also, well, how does a logic model actually help me obtain funding? Well, once you have a complete understanding of your efforts, you can decide where to place your focus for funding. Funding entities often want a very detailed plan, so you can decide whether you will contribute to or concentrate on one of those particular boxes in your logic model, or you can focus on the relationships maybe between some of those boxes. So next slide, please. So this is to help you further understand. Let's just get a little bit familiarized with some of the terminology in these boxes. So first we have stakeholders all the way to the left. Stakeholders, as far as the logic model is concerned, are people who provide the inputs. More generally, stakeholders are people who have a vested interest or a stake in your work, or your vision or your program more broadly. And then next we have inputs. These are the resources that go into your program. These are the tangible things like money or people, staff. They could be volunteers, program or program space, or they could be the intangible resources like time, expertise, access to something or someone that you need. And both are very essential to make these activities possible. So ultimately, your inputs translate to activities. And so these are the necessary actions that must be undertaken in order to accomplish your desired objectives. You can also think of activities as what the program does with the resources. These are the processes or the tools, the events, even the technology and the actions. These are all the intentional components of your program that are necessary for implementation. So these are the things, and sometimes interventions that are used to bring about the intended program or changes, and ultimately the results that you would desire to achieve. So next we have outputs. So these are the direct and the tangible product of your program activities. So as far as logic models go, this is usually maybe the service that you provide or the materials that have been produced as a result of a particular activity. So your inputs, your activities, and your outputs ultimately all translate into outcomes. These are your short-term, your medium-term, and your long-term results. You can kind of think of them as a ripple effect. And so your short-term outcomes might happen sometime between inception and like 1 to 3 years. These are the changes in attitudes and behaviors, but ultimately they might be a direct result of someone participating in your program activities. The medium-term outcomes should be something that you can achieve within a 4 to 6 year time frame. And then the long-term impacts of your work, you can think about that as spanning maybe 7 to 10 years. And these are the ways in which the larger world eventually will benefit from the mere existence of your program. And then lastly, on the bottom of the logic model, you see assumptions and external factors. You want to list your assumptions and all the factors that may be beyond your control. So you want to think about maybe the current political climate and give some attention to that. And you might want to think about other programmatic details like transportation or weather, or even a looming government shutdown. But factors like this, when you need to give attention to them because they can be very impactful for your program in the long run. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. That was your crash course on logic models, but now I want to share with you about the collaborative problem solving model. This is a model that was created by the US EPA's Office of Environmental Justice, and it represents a systematic community-based approach for bringing together various stakeholder groups to develop solutions to address local environmental and public health issues. So this model has been beneficial for many, for not only building capacity, but also creating self-sustaining community-based partnerships. And so the model is comprised of 7 components, which are referred to as elements, and I'll detail each of them for you. Element 1 is a visioning process. So it's a way to think about what the community should look like and helps to establish your community goals. The goals then serve as the foundation for formulating the specific solutions or the desired outcomes for your particular health or environmental problem. And then we have next, element 2. This identifies the necessity of the skills and the information, the resources, and the leadership needed to achieve these goals that you've set. The rationale here is that when you can work with residents and your stakeholders to develop a greater understanding of the environmental concern, then everybody can understand the options that are available to address these concerns, and ultimately you enhance your capacity to meaningfully engage in that decision-making process. So element 3 details the importance of finding effective ways of making group decisions. You're involving the appropriate constituents and you're learning how to resolve disagreements. Element 4 stresses the need for partnership to collectively examine problems, develop action plans, and bring together the resources necessary to achieve goals. Element 5 specifically identifies the relevant non-community stakeholders. So this might be businesses, academia, it could be other civic organizations, and even government, who all play an important role in these collaborative partnerships. Element 6 involves the development of a management strategy and the organization that reflects the ability to identify and carry out these work plans with your clear goals. It has attention to creating a timeline, a time frame, as well as giving attention to the delegation of responsibility in achieving your efforts. And then lastly, element 7 discusses the importance of evaluation. Determining whether your project, your program, or your organization is ultimately achieving its goals, identifying what's working or what's not working, and reviewing your lessons learned in order to build on the strengths and correct problems for future implementation. Next slide, please. And so my takeaway message here is really that the CPS model is an absolute asset for you and your organization. It helps to provide a framework for leadership development. It is a systematic approach for building capacity within your program and your organization. It allows for strategic thinking around working with diverse stakeholders. It helps to create organized brainstorming for ways to address environmental concerns that impact your community. And it's useful for creating structure for programming and partnership, for visioning and creating the change agendas for you and by you. And so I know that I've given you a crash course on a great deal of information, from the logic model to the collaborative problem solving model, but I really look forward to some of the questions, and I hope that I can add some clarity and additional understanding for what I've shared today. So thank you very much for your time, and back to you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williamson. That was so exciting. Before we open the floor for questions, I just wanted to do a quick recap on what each of our panelists discussed. We learned about the logic model and collaborative problem solving from Dr. Dana Williamson. That was incredible. We also learned from Omar, Omar is someone who's actually implemented some of these ideas and some of these processes into raising over $1 million for his own organization. So he's not just giving us a presentation, he's actually talking about things that he's implemented himself. He talked about the importance of storytelling and how you need to take certain steps to walk your project from beginning to end in order to get the funding that you need. Mr. Blackwell stressed the importance of communicating the change that you plan to implement with the funds that you're requesting. And he talked to us about CACA. He said that our proposal needs to be clear, accurate, comprehensive, concise, and accessible. Ms. Manuel told us what the feds are looking for whenever we present them with a request for money or request for grants. She said that they're looking to make sure we've done our research, that we have recruited a team, that we can respond to guidance, that we can be precise. And then they want to make sure that we've reviewed the application and that we allow time for revisions. So if there are any questions, or if there aren't any questions, then we're going to, someone asked, what is the Environmental Justice Academy? Okay, I'll take that answer. But if you have specific questions for our panelists, please put their name in the question and answer box, put their name and put your question. And we're gonna have a 5-minute break at 7 o'clock. The Environmental Justice Academy is a program that was formulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. And basically, the purpose of the program was to pull together information to teach the attendees about the history of environmental justice, the legislation behind it. How can you engage stakeholders in trying to communicate what you need in order for you to get the results that you want, to bring attention to whatever the environmental justice issue is in your community. They talked to us about collaborative problem solving. They talked to us about the importance of being able to basically communicate what your concern is to a larger audience so that you can enroll the help, whether it be human help, whether it be financial help, but basically to bring a light to the environmental justice issue that you're struggling with or that your community is struggling with. It takes community leaders and helps them to feel more confident about sharing the challenges that they're facing in their organization. And Omar is a graduate of the Environmental Justice Academy. I think there's over 60 graduates of the Academy. So if you want to know more about it, you can go on the EPA's website. I'm a graduate from it and I learned so much, but because we're limited on time, I'm just gonna stop there. But definitely go to the EPA's website. You can find out more about it there. And someone asked earlier if this webinar is being recorded. It is being recorded. It's going to be accessible within a week or two. Who is the environmental justice contact in Alabama? So Alabama is in Region 4 of the EPA. And for the first 3 years, the Region 4 covers Tennessee, Alabama, I think Mississippi, Tennessee, and I believe another state, I cannot remember. But when the environmental justice was hosted, we had attendees come from Alabama. We had attendees come from Tennessee. We had attendees here in Atlanta, Georgia. So you would just go to the EPA's website, or actually put your name in the chat box, and then someone, probably Cheryl Good of the EPA, will reach out to you, put your name and contact information in there, and she can let you know about how to learn about, the Environmental Justice Academy. And so if you have questions for our panelists, how are we going to address climate change? Can't address it right now in this 5-minute seminar. Thank you, Mr. DeCosta. But okay, thank you so much, Cheryl. Cheryl has addressed the question about the EJ Academy. So actually, if you have, so one of our panelists asked, how does one become a recognized nonprofit for actually, I think you mean representatives, or to represent your local community directly and your community project? We represent local organizations, not bottom up, self-height. So I think, go ahead. I think somebody just came off of mute. Well, there are a lot of questions. So depending upon what state you're, actually, Omar, would you like to answer that question about becoming a nonprofit? Because Omar has actually done that.
Sure. It's several steps. You first have to become incorporated in your state with the state secretary of whichever state you are locating or operating that nonprofit in. And once you become incorporated, as part of your application to the federal government, for the 501c3 process, you include that incorporation paper along with your bylaws and listing of your officers in your own that will serve on your nonprofit board. And for the purposes of filing your 501c3 application, you only need 3 officers: a president, a treasurer, and your secretary to become a 501c3. So that's the short version of it. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the short version of it.
And again, the bios for each one of our speakers is going to be also accessible on the website. And I believe their contact information isn't on the bio, but if you want to, the person that asked that question, if you want to put your email information into the chat box, I can make sure that Omar can reach out to you and answer it in more depth if you would like. Omar, would you be okay with that? I know I just put you on the spot.
Yes, that works.
Okay, Omar is amazing. He's actually done this. Ladies and gentlemen, so we were supposed to take a break at 7 o'clock, but now all of the questions are rolling in. So how many years has Omar's nonprofit been in business? Omar, you can answer that question. Then we're going to go on. There's so many great questions. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end of the thing, but Omar, how many years has your nonprofit been in operation?
17 years.
17 years. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, just so that we can allow, go ahead. So that we can allow the attendees to take a quick bio break and to allow our next panelists to get ready to speak. We're going to take 5 minutes. So we're going to resume at 7:10. I'm sorry, at 7:08 sharp. And thank you. Someone said you also have to file with the IRS for nonprofit status. So with that, I'm going to go on mute. And if you guys want to chat in the question answer box, feel free, but we're going to resume the presentation at 7:08. Thank you so much. Do not go away, because again, the next session is going to be Dr. Melanie Pearson and Dr. Sakobi Wilson. They're going to talk to us about academic institution resources. They're not just federal grants and state grants, But if you form partnerships with academic institutions, there's also there's resources for you there in order to get what you need to present your message regarding environmental justice. So with that, 7:08 we'll resume. Thank you. Okay, so it's 7:08. Our next panelists are Melanie Pearson and Dr. Jacoby Wilson. Melanie Pearson received her bachelor's degree from Clemson University and her graduate degrees from the University of Missouri, Columbia. As an environmental scientist at Emory University, she managed studies on environmental exposure. She published articles and she worked with the local community to address environmental concerns regarding pesticides application to municipal sports fields. She leads the community engagement. She leads the community engagement core of the Emory Hercules program. It's a research center that develops strategies to engage the local and Atlanta community with the dual purpose to strengthen capacity building, address environmental health concerns, and to create a feedback system so that the community's concerns and ideas are shared with scientists and integrated. She has been doing this for almost 30 years or 20 years. So she has a lot of experience and is very engaged in the community. Jacoby Wilson is an associate professor with the Maryland Institute of Applied Environmental Health and Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, School of Public Health, University of Maryland, College Park. He has over 20 years of experience as an environmental health scientist. He works tirelessly to build environmental justice organizations and coalitions. He is the co-founder of the DMV Environmental Justice Coalition and the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Justice Coalition. He's the founder for 17 for Peace and Justice, which is an environmental justice advocacy organization. And he is the faculty advisor for a student chapter of 17 for Peace and Justice on the campus of the University of Maryland, College Park. Again, both the bios for both of our panelists, all of our panelists, will be available on the website. So you can read more about them and their work there. But without any further ado, I will turn the floor to Dr. Pearson and Dr. Wilson, pardon me. Dr. Pearson, hi.
Yes, hi, how is everyone doing? I'm really excited to be here, especially because a lot of the questions that I've seen so far in the question and answer have really talked about having the capacity to fulfill all these requirements that you're seeing on the federal grants, that people have been discussing so far. And I'm hoping that some of the resources that I'm going to share with you can help fill some of those capacity needs of some of the smaller community-based organizations that are getting close to the point of applying for these larger federal grants. Next slide, please. So again, I'm just going to be discussing resources available at communities, so at universities and colleges. So next slide. Some of the commonly available resources at university and colleges, next slide. As you can imagine, all of these places include students. All of our universities and colleges include students, and they can be a great resource for you. Now, it can be from simple things just like volunteering, one-day volunteering, individual days and efforts, not a long-term thing. But some of this can really help your organization. We've had local organizations use our students to help them collect data for grants on student volunteer days, to help them canvass the neighborhood and do surveying, as well as you can see in the picture here of students simply helping with a local urban garden. Another thing that a lot of folks don't know that a lot of colleges and universities offer are service learning classes. And these are classes where students and groups provide a service to a community organization related to the content that they're learning in class. And I'm just showing a few examples here. Some of these are like community needs assessment. Student groups can help you develop a curriculum. They can help you with your digital engagement strategy. So how to use social media to build up your membership and to get out your message. they can do some of the literature and document review that you need for some of the grants that you're applying. So early on, one of our speakers spoke about the research that needs to be done, and you need to have research skills. Well, students can fill some of those capacity needs for you. They can help with marketing materials. I've seen things where students have, like in engineering schools, have designed outdoor spaces and done the, design proposal steps for community organizations. So there are so many different service learning classes at different universities and colleges. I really encourage you to take a look at that. Another thing, if you want a more in-depth engagement with a student that really does a lot of work, is students, upper level undergraduates, as well as graduate students, often have to do a capstone or thesis project to graduate. And this thesis project can really be addressing a community need or a need of your organization that would help you in the grant process. And one way to do this is just contact your local university or college and ask, especially if there's a certain need you have that would match a department, ask if those students are available to work with you for their capstone and thesis projects. But another way to do this is there's a couple of organizations that will help match you, do the matchmaking for you. One is EPA's college, is called CUP. It's College and Underserved Community Partnership Program, where the EPA will match you with a local college to help do the work that you're requesting. And then there's also a nonprofit called College and Community Partnerships Program that is a similar mechanism. Next slide, please. In addition, a lot of students have to complete fellowships, practicums, and a lot also do work study programs. These can be summer undergraduate fellowships. For a Master's of Public Health degree, students have to complete a practicum that's up to 400 hours, between 200 to 400 hours of work experience. And the student has to produce 2 deliverables for an organization when they do this. Now, admittedly, a lot of the students like to be paid for this work, but not always. They do this unpaid. In addition, there are work study programs, and where I'm at the Emory University Rollins School of Public Health, our program will pay half the student's salary for them to work in your organization for 10 to 20 hours per week for a semester. So the ultimate cost to an organization to have a student work for them and essentially be an employee of their organization is $1,500 for the semester. So it's a pretty good deal. Lastly, there's professional student services. For example, nursing students can staff community health fairs, as you see in the picture I'm showing here. And then there are other pro bono services, especially a lot of the law schools offer pro bono services. For example, at Emory, we have the Turner Environmental Law Clinic, where they provide pro bono representation to community groups, specifically around environmental concerns. Next slide. And then, of course, we have our faculty, our professors and scientists, and they can provide a lot of content-specific guidance for you. They can do something as simple as serve as a content expert at a community meeting, which is what I have an example of here in the picture. But they can also provide guidance on a community collected data, so that when you collect that data, it would be collected in a way that makes sure that it's valid and it can be usable, especially if you want to submit it to for a grant. They can review environmental data that the community has collected on their own and help you interpret that data and summarize it. And they can also partner with you on research to address a community concern. And my co-presenter will talk more about this later. Next slide. Now, in addition to the common resources that I've described, there are also resources offered by large research centers that are often located at universities and colleges. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of these centers are funded through our federal government, the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, EPA with the Superfund centers, and here are 4 examples. There are more, but here are 4 examples of community-based research centers that include community engagement cores. Now, all the resources that I've mentioned here are included in the resource guide that our moderator described previously that will be available to you. And you can go and see if there's one of these centers in your area, and then search for their community engagement core and look at the activities of those community engagement cores and what services they offer. And say, for example, you're in an area that has a prevention research center, but you really have an environmental health concern. Even if that's the case, you can still reach out to that prevention research center, and they often provide training or technical assistance that can still assist you, even though the focus of your community need may be different than what their center is focused on. So don't be shy about reaching out, or they may be able to connect you to one of the other centers that does have a better match with yours. But please reach out to these community engagement cores, because this is what they're funded to do. Next slide. Now, here are some examples of some of the workshops and trainings that I'm familiar with through these types of community engagement cores at these research centers. So some of them provide trainings and workshops on how to conduct a community needs assessment, how to do program planning, the program evaluation, the very quick tutorial that Dr. Williamson provided. They can really elaborate on that and help. They do grant writing workshops. They do workshops on how to access and use public data sets, how to develop surveys. One here that I have featured is helping communities identify their own issues and prioritize those issues, and then come together and coalesce and act. The one that I show here is a multi-step and multi-year project that brings communities together, helps them identify their concern, organize around that concern, take action, and keep it going. And we provide small amounts of funding at each of these stages, as well as technical assistance through it. There's also advocacy training. Oh, if you could go back real quick. There's also centers that provide advocacy training, and there's summer programs for both local high school teachers as well as for local high school students to get some training on some of these things. Next slide. So in addition to the trainings, some of these centers, not all of them, but some of these centers offer small amounts of funding for community-led programs and activities. And one of the questions in the question and answer earlier was asking about, you know, these large grants, federal grants that require so much work and also so much capacity to be able to meet the requirements. Well, these grants that are offered through Research Center are usually smaller and don't require that. And in fact, they provide a lot of the technical assistance in each step. Now, again, this isn't at all of these centers, but quite a few of them do this. And one thing you should know is that these community grant programs often do align with the mission of the center. So you have to match that mission. Here, I'm giving an example of one that's offered through North Carolina State University, with its focus around environmental health concerns. And these grants can be small, anywhere from $2,500 for a year up to $20,000. But again, this is a great way to get that first grant, to meet the requirements of grant, provide the outcomes, and do the evaluation on your program, and show that you do have the capacity to manage these federal funds and provide the reporting and carry out the program. So it's a great way to do that initial capacity building to be prepared for larger federal grants. Next slide. So the previous one that I described was for community-led projects, where it's the community identifies the need, the community determines the activities, and the community carries it out. Now, there are also some funding opportunities for community academic partnerships, where a community organization partners with an academic partner, often a faculty member or scientist within the center, and then together they develop plans and carry out a project. So These pilot grants can really be very helpful, again, for developing that capacity and addressing a community concern. But I also want to be honest to make sure that you know what the goals of these pilot grants are. The goals really are to collect and provide data that are needed to apply for a larger multi-year research grant. The academic partner is often the primary lead on these grants. It's usually for only 1 year of funding. It can be anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000. The funding can be shared between the academics and the community partner, but to be honest, it's often not equal, and even to be even more honest, not necessarily equitable either. But the good thing about these grants is they can address community concerns. They often can be funded very quickly. The applications aren't very burdensome, and you have a lot of the resources of the university to help carry this out. And just as one quick example, these that I have pictured here are community engaged pilot grants that the center that I'm with, the Emory Hercules Center, has funded in partnership with local communities in Atlanta. And the one where you see that says Urban Gardens and Lead, that small $50,000 grant, 1 year grant, has actually did find high levels of lead in soil and has now led to EPA remediating a lot of the residential yards in this area, which you see a picture of here from our local newspaper. And another one, which was looking at industrial air pollution in a local community, has also led to so EPA acting and coming in and doing site visits and finding the local polluter, the source of the pollution, and there's other local actions that are still happening. So even though these are 1 year grants and they're small, they really can have quite a bit of impact. Again, I do want to just be honest and say a lot of these pilot programs are not community oriented, but if you happen to be in a area that does have a center that has the community oriented pilot grants, this is a great mechanism. Next slide. And in addition to the funding opportunities that the centers offer, there are some federal opportunities for these community academic partnerships. Again, not many, but there are some out there. The one thing about applying for these federal grants is it often takes several years to get funding. You know, there's a lot of writing a proposal, submitting it, then having to revise it, resubmit it. But these multi-year grants can be ranging up to $500,000 per year in funding. The academic partner is often the co-investigator on the grant, and funding is shared between partners. Again, not necessarily equitably or equally, but that also depends on the partnership. But these can address the community concerns while also including scientific innovation. So again, there's not a lot of these research grants that require an academic community partnership, but there are a few. So if you're interested in this, you can reach out to me and I can provide additional information about these types of grants. So before I end, the one thing I want to just give as a take-home point is the capacity that you may need to apply for some of these grants, whether it's a community needs assessment, whether we offer a service learning class that actually will write a grant with a community organization, so you can have students working on that with you. The students can do the research that you need for a grant. They can help you develop your evaluation plan and your logic model. And in my center, we offer our community partners, we will review an application that they write and provide feedback on it so they can go through that revision process. And also, they often write in our students to fill roles in the grants that they can't necessarily afford. And like was mentioned before, you don't want a lot of money going to personnel. The students cost less, and at my institution, we subsidize that cost to the organization, so they can often get a lot more staffing written into their grant for less money. So those are just some ideas, but now I'd like to turn it over to my co-presenter, Dr. Sakobi Wilson, who's going to talk to you about community academic partnerships and building these partnerships.
Cool. Thank you, Melanie, for that mic transfer. So I'm going to talk more about community engaged research and some of the background about the whole framework and give you a few examples. Let me share my screen. And I have, was it, how much do I want to take? 15 minutes? Do I still have 15 minutes or 10 minutes? Cheryl?
I think we're going to do 10 minutes because we're going to try to do a question and answer. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah. No, you're right. Thanks, Charlotte.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just share a few slides. Thank you for that. So just to kind of step back a little bit and give you a little bit of background, when you want to work with academic institutions, as Dr. Pearson talked about, is really one way to kind of engage with is through community engaged research. And she talked about issues of equity, issues of differential sort of infrastructure, right? But when you think about community engaged research, this is a continuum that I like to share when we talk about this kind of work. And so when you kind of interface with academic institutions, these may be experiences you may have had in the past, where you have outreach. You kind of move from left to right, from outreach, consultation, involvement, story, and community driven. As you move left to right, trust increases, kind of partnership increases, communication increases, and hopefully impact and action increases. Because those of you who are impacted by environmental justice issues, right, work with communities with EJ issues, you want to see action, right? And so you want to make sure you work with a university partner who is not doing extractive science, right? Who's not just doing discovery science, who's not doing helicopter science, right? You want to have scientific partners who actually are reflecting the 17 principles of environmental justice, right? So their ethos of really doing applied action-oriented science, okay? Good engagement science. And really what I like to call it is, you want to challenge your academic partners to do what I call empowerment science. Dr. Fisher talked about capacity, building people's capacity to use scientific tools, but their capacity is built, then they can actualize their own power to impact change. And I also talked about, liberation science. You never heard of it before. But if you want to work on these issues of environmental justice, how can we liberate folks from toxic trauma, toxic pollution, right? So when you're engaging with academic partners, you just don't want them studying stuff. We have enough data. We need to get to the action. So that's what I'm pushing in my work. And that's what I'm going to share with you. That's what you should be asking for when you have partnerships with academic institutions. But you have this outreach, which ends up being unidirectional. You have more consultation and get more community involvement. Then you get to the involvement stage, which is maybe you have a community advisory board. Then you get to kind of the meat of where you want to be when it comes to working with an academic partner. You have participatory research. We call it community-based participatory research. You also have participatory action research. Then you have the gold standard, in my opinion, which is community-driven research. The research is of the community, for the community, by the community, but you have to have a high level capacity to do community-driven research. I would say Lamsey and Omar, they have the capacity, individual capacity, leadership capacity, organizational capacity, and programmatic capacity. It takes time to build that capacity. So the key ingredients of authentic transformative partnerships, again, think about all those things that create good relationships, right? And some of you may be in an environment where you have academic institution where there may be baggage and tension there. How can you overcome that? Dr. Pearson mentioned why you may have some of those differences, right? But you want to have trust, honesty, transparency. You want some Aretha Franklin, respect, okay, equity. It has to be mutually beneficial to all partners, just not data and grants and publications. For the community partners, the benefits of addressing problems. So, really when you think about engaging academic partners, what are the issues, right? What are the impacts of those issues that you're experiencing? What are the opportunities to work together? What are the benefits, mutual benefits to both sets of partners, right? The community side and academic side. You have to think about what and how that can lead to real partnerships, okay? And you want to have clear roles and expectations of all partners. You want to make sure your funding agencies are supporting this work. So just not push on the academic partners to do better, be better. Also our funders, right? To make sure that funding at the right level capacity, there's equity in funding. And make sure, as Dr. Bishop said, people are compensated for their time. Those of you in the community, right, who are on this phone call, you are a contextual expert. You are expert in your lived experiences. That needs to be value uplifted. Community cultural knowledge systems. You should ask for that in these partnerships. And so just like I get paid for my time, you should get paid for your time. So these grants need to make sure that community partners have been compensated fairly. And that's important. Think about transferable skills that can be gained, and then the mentoring and learning that you get from these partnerships. You think about CVPR, we're talking about the community is engaged in all stages of the research process. So community-based research engage in the development of research questions, because if you're going to have impactful science, y'all, liberation, empowerment science, it has to be informed by the lived experience and things that you're going through. So Dr. Mitchell McLean says that community members are the true subject matter experts. And if you are going through these issues, you want to make sure that you are coming up with the questions so you get the best data, get the best science to solve the problems. You're engaged in the development of the study design. You're engaged in the development of the analytical methodology. You're engaged in the data collection. You may be engaged in data analysis. You are also engaged in dissemination, and then you're engaged in translating that data to action. So local knowledge is valuable and uplifted. There's shared power and control. You want to make sure you're not treated as a subject. You're not an object. You're a person, and you need to be respected and valued such, right? And you have what I like to call specificatory knowledge. I'm going to say that again. Academics, we have general knowledge. Those of you living with it, you have specific knowledge. You need both knowledge bases to solve problems. And you want to work with people where the researcher goes from the expert, the credentialed scientist, to be a more facilitator and catalyst, right? So we want to recognize the community's unit of identity. We want to have an assets-based approach. Let's do science that's about wrong with you. Let's do more science about what's right with you. And you should push for that in your partnerships, right? You want to have equitable partnerships. You want to have, again, capacity building is key, and capacity maintenance is key. And it shouldn't just be about research, okay? And you want to make sure you have an ethical approach to how folks are being engaged in. Science communication is really, really important. How are you making sure that policymakers are getting the science that's being done? It's not just about peer-reviewed publications. I like to say peer-reviewed publications is not science communication make. That's my Yoda way of saying that. That's not how you do communicate. If you don't communicate science to have real impact, you got to be doing other things. That's not about impact. That's about academics. If you're going to address the problem through science and communication, you have to have white papers and blogs and briefs, have your elevator speech, be able to do visuals to policymakers, right? Get the information in the ways that people understand and they learn they can use it. And I don't have a lot of time, and y'all can give me a time check once I get close to 2 minutes. Who is the research for? Traditional research is for, kind of the academics, but what is research for? CVPR, it's about action. Who's it for? It's about the people, right? Whose knowledge counts on the CVPR is both community and researchers. Topic chosen by local priorities. So it's been driven by local priorities. Who conducts the research? Both local community members and also researchers. Problem identification is already said, local people. So with CVPR, you're driving the science, you're driving the research. It's other people, for the people, and by the people. I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. So example of this work is the West End Revitalization Association. I worked with them as a grad student at UNC Chapel Hill some years ago. They had issues with a highway being built through these post-slavery Black neighborhoods. They also didn't have access to sewer and water infrastructure, publicly regulated. They were on well water and in septic tanks. We called it a lack of basic amenities. We worked with them to basically come up with a framework called community owned and managed research, which would be community-driven research on the far end of that spectrum that continuum that showed before, right? And basically, this is about equity and funding and parity and management, communities driving the work. And it's really about science for compliance, y'all. So you work with academics, you want to make sure your science is actually, again, leading to action. In this case, it's about compliance with environmental rules and regulations, compliance with Title VI, okay? And we found a high rate of septic system failure in this community. Levels of water quality indicators above maximum contaminant levels. And it was interesting is this work helped to shut down the highway for a while. This work helped to get first-time installation of sewer and water infrastructure, get people's roads paved for the first time, okay? So this is when you talk about, real action research. You're solving the problems, not just studying it, but translating again to action. We're doing work right now on disasters with Reach in North Carolina, which deals with industrial hog farms, and also with Lamsey in North Charleston, using the CVPR framework, okay? And to seeing how natural technological disasters disproportionately impact communities of color. And so you saw what happened with Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Nicholas, right? Who's impacted? Each communities are impacted differentially, but what populations are in those communities? Children and the elderly are more at risk from flooding, right, during these events. So we're doing some work to really get community informed information about how we do disaster readiness, right, in these type of scenarios.
You have about 90 seconds.
Okay, thank you, because I'm not looking at the chat. So thank you for that.
It's okay.
So we're doing mapping, y'all. So we got something called PPGIS, or Public Participatory GIS. We're doing mapping so communities can map these hazards, map sewer and water infrastructure, map what has been flood events, right? We have an app that we're developing called My Block Counts, where community members will be able to collect very granular data on what's happening on the blocks. Do you have sidewalks? Do you have crosswalks? Do you have sewer drains, right? Do you have grocery stores? All this very granular data that you can then map and then use that data again for action. And so working with academic partners, they help collect that data. And then you use this app as a way to ground truth some of these problems. We're doing also stormwater issues, and someone mentioned climate change. Think about the stormwater impacts from episodic rain events, from hurricanes, right? Whose communities are impacted by it? We're using community engagement again to look at stormwater issues in Baltimore, working with communities in Baltimore and also in the Watts Branch area, in the Anacostia River, both Maryland and in DC. So this is another example of how you can engage communities, okay, and do work together. Let me skip. Citizen science is a term that's not the best term, but again, how we democratize science? Anybody can be a scientist, y'all. So you already a scientist, you're dealing with these issues in your community. So don't let someone say you're not doing good science, or you're not a scientist, you don't have a PhD. Anybody can be a scientist. So citizen science work is I'm gonna end on this slide. Some of you are in communities with a lot of air quality issues. You can build your own networks to measure air quality, measure particulate matter, work at academic partners using the CBPR framework to do that. And so we're doing this work in Cheverly, Maryland. We're doing this with folks in Savannah with Harambee House and Dr. McLean. We're working with Kim Gaddy in Newark as well. And then we also been doing some of this work, air quality monitoring, with Omar in North Charleston. So these are things that you can do when you work in partnership with academic institutions. And I'll just say last, I've been working with Omar since 2007, working with REACH in North Carolina since 2003, and started working with Omega, we're with the first example in 1999. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. It is so great to hear people who are passionate about what they speak about, and you are obviously passionate and you are in action. So thank you on behalf of the communities. Thank you. So with that, we're going to open the floor for questions for the last two panelists. We're going to take 2 minutes. So if you have a question for Dr. Wilson or for I cannot remember Melanie's last name. She's awesome, but say it again, Melanie Pearson or Dr. Pearson. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to shut up. If you guys have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and they will answer them.
Charlotte, we already have a couple in the Q&A.
Okay. I can't read.
Okay, for Dr. Wilson, will you explain the mapping app? Can it be modified for stormwater management? And
yes, so we're trying to bring in a stormwater component. Actually, one of my colleagues that works on the project, his name is Dr. Marcus Hendricks. He has a ArcGIS 123 app called Patty, which is actually a stormwater infrastructure app. We can see where there's real-time flooding. So Dr. Hendricks' app is really more focused on stormwater. Our app isn't right now, but it could be integrated. But he already has an app that you can use called Patty to look at stormwater issues. So he's at University of Maryland College Park. Marcus, M-A-R-C-C-U-S, Hendricks, H-E-N-D-R-I-C-K-S.
And
question, Dr. Wilson, and it's, do you have any principles for community-driven research? We often get contacted to partner after the research goal has been developed and would love support on how to share how we want to partner.
Yeah, so thank you for that. One organization that really supports the use of community-based participatory research and has principles of partnership, I actually took them out of the presentation. It's called CCPH, Community Campus Partnerships for Health. So they have these principles of partnership. So, the community needs to be involved in all stages, not so the research questions need to come from the community. So you have to push back on it. One of the things that we advocate for our partners to do is to make sure they develop MOUs. So what are you going to bring to the table? And we integrate the CBPR principles into the MOU. So this is our living document. This is how we're going to work together. So look at ccph.org. Their website has a lot of resources on how to do good community engagement, how to do good CVPR. And if you have any other questions, we also are doing workshops on CVPR. We have a workshop series that we can share with you too. And so just you can email me for more information.
Okay. And with that, also would like to encourage you guys to Google the site that Dr. Pearson was talking about, the LED site here in Atlanta, Georgia. I believe they're going to turn that into a Superfund site, but the work that organization did on that let people know about lead in soil in communities, at-risk communities here in Atlanta. So this is real life stuff that we're talking about. So with that, I'm now going to very briefly introduce the next set of panelists. We have Mr. Jonathan Corso, who is currently the Environmental Justice Grants Program Manager with the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice in Washington, D.C. Since joining the OEJ in 2015, he's focused on increasing applicant accessibility to the grant program. He's also focused on improving sustainability of the EJ grants and to promoting the program's outreach to underrepresented and rural areas. And I'm sorry, and in addition, this next part of the panel, this next part of today's presentation is going to be the lightning talk. So each person has 3 minutes to talk about their specific topic. So this is called the lightning talks from the EPA and EJ and Brownfields grant, and from the Economic Development Administration resources. So one of the other speakers we have coming up with the lightning talks is Cindy Nolan. Cindy has worked with the EPA since 1983. She is the first 15 in she spent the first 15 in the Chicago office. During those years, she worked with the Superfund program and in the water program, negotiating cleanup plans for the Great Lake Harbor sites. She has a degree in environmental science from the Southern Illinois University and volunteers with the city's historic homes and Atlanta Theater. She's also been with the Region 4's Brownfield Section Chief since 2013. Jonathan Corso is the Georgia representative of the Economic Development Administration, the EDA, here in Atlanta, Georgia. He provides applicants with technical assistance, reviews funding requests, and makes funding recommendations. So you guys have got to have questions for him. He received his master's in public administration from Syracuse University and his BA from the University of Massachusetts. So with that, I'm now going to turn the lightning talks over to them. And you guys have 3 minutes to talk about your respective programs.
Great.
Jacob, you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
for the introduction. So I just wanted to give a quick rundown about the environmental justice grant opportunities we have here at EPA. So I'm the Environmental Justice Grants Program Manager, and I wanted to spotlight, and you can go to the next slide, and I'll just stick with this slide and talk through some of the opportunities. So I'm going to focus on our 2 most popular opportunities, which is our environmental justice small grants opportunity. So that provides funding for 1-year projects of up to $75,000 each. And also our EJ Collaborative Problem Solving Awards program as well. And those are 2-year projects for up to $200,000 each. Now, these 2 grant opportunities, the small grants and the Collaborative Problem Solving Awards, are exclusively for grassroots organizations, community-based organizations. So your nonprofits, either incorporated with the IRS or incorporated with your state, as well as tribal governments. So these opportunities are not available to state governments, local governments, municipalities, school districts, colleges or universities. So we want these funding opportunities and this funding to go directly to the communities, the community members, to those communities that need it the most. So we do have a couple of other grant opportunities for those other entities, but the vast majority of all of our grants and all our grant funding goes directly to community-based organizations. Now, in terms of eligibility, we can fund projects that hit on 7 of the main environmental statutes. So Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Federal Insecticide, Fungicide and Rodenticide Act, TSCA, and some others. So TSCA is the Toxic Substances Control Act. So a lot of your lead and asbestos and things like that. And we can fund projects that deal directly with training, education, public outreach, monitoring and sampling, a lot of the citizen science, community pilots and demonstration projects. So our level of funding doesn't grant us opportunities to do any construction or any demolition or refurbishment. So there are other programs, agencies, and EPA programs that have some of those authorities. But those grassroots, public outreach, education, demonstration projects, a lot of green jobs training programs, a lot of green infrastructure installation and pilot projects, a lot of community workshops, surveys and studies, a lot of the citizen sampling that Dr. Sakobi talked about. So we fund a lot of those different projects to really build a wind swell behind the community, get the ball rolling in the community, so these funds can be catalytic and seed funding to help the community eventually resolve some of the longstanding environmental injustices that they've been dealing with. So overall, there's a 6-month timeline from the time that we open a grants opportunity till the moment it's actually awarded to the winning grantees. So we closed an opportunity for the small grants and the collaborative problem solving awards this past June. So we'll be looking to award over 100 of those small grants and collaborative problem solving awards here later this fall. So we're really, really excited about that. So the American Rescue Plan funding helped really supplement a lot of our traditional, EJ appropriations that we get every year. Each of the funding opportunities that I write includes guidance and tips in the appendices. So look at the back of those and you'll hear a lot of what was echoed earlier about utilizing a logic model, as well as the collaborative problem solving model that my office created back in 2003. So utilizing those particular tools to help flesh out your project narrative are very, very helpful things to include in your project, as well as building a diversity of partnerships and collaborations. So coalition building, which is really critical as part of the collaborative problem solving model. You will be evaluated and scored on the quality of your partnerships and how you articulate that in your project narrative. So again, I'm looking at issuing another opportunity for the small grants and collaborative problem solving probably later this spring or next spring, in late spring 2022. That opportunity will be open for about 3 months. So that'll give you time to kind of get with your community partners and really take a deep dive with the community as to how you might want to approach a possible application for our opportunity. But if you go to the next slide, quickly, I know that I'm running out of time. You can, I think you have access to these slides. You can click on these links. It gives a full rundown of our environmental justice opportunities. You can look at that EJ grant story map. So it gives a visual representation of some of the projects that we funded through the collaborative problem solving and small grants opportunities. And you can always email me or give me a call. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I think the next panelist coming up is Cindy. Cindy, take it away.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm here representing the Brownfields program. We are a land-based EPA environmental grant program to communities and in the more recent years to nonprofits as well. Our focus is the eyesores within a community that are commercial or industrial. Our program does not address housing, but your abandoned gas stations, for example, the old dry cleaners, the local downtown areas that are abandoned and have fallen into disarray and really contributed to community blight and the perception of disinvestment in the area. This is the area where we shine. Our best applicants are those who are capable of managing a grant. So if you have handled an EJ grant in the past, maybe it's time for you to progress to a Brownfields grant and take a look at your community from that perspective. We do quite a bit of training for our applicants. And right now, the solicitation, which is open in the fall, just opened this week on Tuesday. It closes 90 days later on December 1st. So that application can be found at epa.gov/brownfields. Very simple, very straightforward. But let me go over some of the types of programs that we have to offer. Our biggest is the assessment grant program. That's typically around $300,000. And this is to look at a piece of property and try to figure out, why is it so ugly? Is there a problem there? Is there no problem? It just looks bad. Let's find out if there's actually an environmental risk. We're concerned about our children playing there. That's an assessment grant. A cleanup is where we know we've got a problem. We need bigger money and a bigger approach to resolving that. Revolving loan fund is where we can give out a pot of money and this is a bigger pot of money, to a larger organization, and they can give smaller amounts of money for cleanups to other organizations. Multi-purpose grant is something that combines both assessment and cleanup on the same property. And then we also have a very, very popular job training grant. It is designed to help those hard to employ people. Quite frankly, we work with a lot of universities and we work with a lot of people that have, for various reasons, been difficult to employ. And we teach them how to clean up sites in their own community. It's an extremely popular program. And that one has closed right now. It'll open again next summer. We also have in-house a little pot of money that we reserve so that we can help communities individually. And we call that the targeted brownfields. We have our own contractor on board, and we look at the need and the redevelopment potential. Our goal is to turn communities around economically, environmentally, socially, and make them much more functional without pushing them out, right? We don't want to gentrify communities. We also have technical assistance to brownfields. For those communities that are really high on this need, we do have some contractors that are available to assist and help develop capacity and do some training for those kinds of communities at no cost to the community. So brownfields has fingers in a number of different areas, and we have some state brownfields associations that become both for Florida, Alabama, and Georgia have state brownfield associations. You can easily Google them. They're great organizations to become involved with and begin to learn through their seminars that are often free, as well as these opportunities here. But I'm always available to answer any questions and help folks forward on this path. All right.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Appreciate that. All right, if there are no more final words, then Jacob, I think I'm going to tee it up and shoot it to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Corso, and I am the Georgia representative for the U.S. Economic Development Administration. We are a very small agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce, and I work out of the Atlanta regional office. Next slide. So EDA has a number of different grant programs. All we do is grants. We don't do loans. We do construction grants. These are typically used for public infrastructure projects like water, sewer, road, and rail. We also fund the construction of small business incubators, workforce development centers, and under some very limited circumstances, we can finance the acquisition of machinery and equipment. But what we need in order to participate in any construction project is we need a committed private sector beneficiary, a company, who's willing to make specific job and private investment commitments to the project. We can't do speculative projects. You can't use EDA as an incentive tool, and you cannot pirate or steal jobs from other states. We need new jobs and new private investment. The other types of grants we have are non-construction grants. These are typically used for feasibility studies, technical assistance reports, engineering studies, tourism studies, things of that nature. Now, while we don't need specific job and private investment commitments, what we do need is we need for the project to be focused on economic development. You can't use our non-construction grant funds for community development activities. Next slide. Eligible applicants to EDA basically include everybody except for individuals and for-profits. Everyone else is eligible to apply for EDA. We mostly work with cities, counties, and development authorities. Next slide. So an EDA grant is typically made to a region that is suffering from economic distress. And normally I would go through our per capita income and unemployment requirements, but for hopefully a limited time, every county in the United States is eligible for an EDA grant based on COVID-19. That in our world and everyone's world is a disaster. And as a disaster, every county is impacted by it. And therefore, every county in the United States is eligible for an EDA grant until the disaster is declared over, whenever that may be. So that's all I need to say about that. Next slide. So it's very easy to submit to EDA an eligible project. It's much more difficult to submit to EDA a competitive project. We have a number of factors we look at when we consider project competitiveness. We look at the cost per job. For EDA, we like a low cost per job, and that's about $5,000. We also like high private investment. For EDA, high private investment is about 22 private dollars for every EDA dollar. So if you request $1 million from EDA, we typically on average will see about 200 jobs and about 22 million in private investment. Those numbers vary from project to project, but that's generally what we try to achieve. Cash match, the regulations allow for in-kind match, but cash is more competitive. And distressed. The more distressed you are, the more competitive your application is. Next slide. So just some notables and tips. EDA did receive substantial resources under the American Rescue Plan Act. We mixed things up a little bit this time around with those funds. We have 6 different notice of funding opportunities that you can see on our webpage. So check out eda.gov and search for that. We do require matching funds. Typically, we fund projects at 50 to 80% of the total project cost. The best advice I can give you is don't begin work before you receive an EDA grant. Any work that you do before you receive the grant funds would be ineligible for reimbursement. So you have to wait till you have the award. You submit through grants.gov, so you need to register with them. You need to make sure you're registered with the system for award management. That's a requirement as well. And if you aren't familiar with your regional commission, in Georgia there's 12 of them, then consider reaching out to your regional commission because they can help with grant writing and grant management once an award is made. Next slide. So this is my contact information. I am the Georgia representative. Every state has their own representative. If you're not a Georgia resident and you reach out to me, I'm happy to answer your question, and I will. But I'll also give you the contact information for the representative who resides in your state. So that's all I have for tonight, and I'll pass it back to Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's so much information. That was great in such a short amount of time. So for all of the participants that stayed on for the last 3 lightning talks, I know you guys got a lot out of it. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending, and our speakers and panelists have spent hours in preparation just to make sure we could have this information available for you. And don't forget to check out the resource guide that's going to be available for you, as well as the recording of the webinar. It's going to be available at the beginning of next week on the website. I'd like to take, sorry, but before we close out, I also wanted to reintroduce Omar, because I know Omar wanted to have some parting words before we closed out. Omar, did you want to say something in regards to grassroots?
Good evening, and thank you again, everyone, for attending tonight, this evening's webinar. We want to close this section with a call to action. In the interest of time, if you're interested in participating in this, please add your contact information in the chat. But we are looking at convening a community-wide kind of roundtable or stakeholder group that is going to be discussing how do we work together to get more funding into our organizations, into our communities. And this is going to be a ground-up approach. Once we get a set of recommendations, those recommendations, we're going to work to get them in front of the necessary agencies and the federal government to start to work on implementation of those recommended suggestions and policies. So if you're interested in participating in that, please drop your information in the chat so that we can follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put my own information in the chat. We thank you again for attending tonight's webinar. And we look forward to you attending the last webinar for this calendar year. It's going to be in November, and it's on addressing and understanding unregulated contaminants in drinking water, a PFAS case study. Please visit the website next week for a list of resources, the presenters, biographies, and presentations, the link into the recording. That sums it up for me.
Charlotte, can I say one thing? Yes.
Sure.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you as our moderator for this evening. You've done a remarkable job. Thank you very much. And I also want to take a moment to thank our planning team. Like Charlotte mentioned, our presenters have worked countless number of hours, but we also had a planning team that has been working for many months, pulling this presentation or this webinar together for you. So it was Charlotte Clark on the planning team, Lakeisha Robinson, she's in the EPA office in the Gulf Coast, Dr. Melanie Pearson, who was one of our presenters this evening, as well as Omar Muhammad. So let's give them all a virtual round of applause. They, along with our presenters, have done a phenomenal job pulling this presentation together or this webinar together for you this evening. I think, did you say something about the survey, Charlotte?
I did not.
Okay.
Please do.
Okay. Well, at the conclusion of this webinar, you will receive a link for the survey either tonight or tomorrow. Please take a few minutes to fill it out to help inform us on future webinars and how we can improve on the materials that we've attempted to present to you. This will really help us a lot in the future. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Cheryl, for all your
okay.
effort in putting all this together. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. People, if you have any questions about the Environmental Justice Academy, please reach out to Cheryl Good. She's been with the program since the very beginning. So make sure you reach out to Cheryl Good. If you have any questions or if you want her to reach out to you, please put your information in the Q&A box and she'll respond. So.
All right. Well, good evening. Yes, thank you very much.